It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin.
Esperanza, you want to talk about signature events on the Eastern Long Island social calendar, if you will. This one is right up there in a lot of ways. And we're going to, all right, I'm going to spill the beans to our audience right from the get-go. No huge build-up. I guess I'm not feeling the
No,
big
well, I
build-up
mean, I've
today.
seen the title already, Irwin. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. That's also true. That's also, yeah. So that's also. It's actually a very good point. I never really put it in that kind of term, but yes, when you click on it, you know what it is. Here I am making this dramatic build-up for nothing. But anyway, we
Good
are going to
effort, though.
talk.
Good effort.
It's a thought anyway, exactly. But it was what we're talking about is the Hampton Classic. Um, you know, as our audience probably knows, Esperanza, you and I are avid woman and horsemen,
We're horse people for
respectively.
sure.
We're horse
We
people for
horse
sure.
around. That's what
We
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 do.
we, we horse around. Yeah, my connection to horses is really. I didn't even tell this to Esperanza when we had a little brief diatribe before we hit record. Yeah, I remember as a kid, Esperanza, my parents taking us to dude ranches in upstate New York and the Catskills, the Rocking Horse Ranch, and all of this. That's been my exposure to horses, I guess.
Well,
Um,
that's
you
not
know,
bad.
merry-go-rounds has been my exposure to horses,
There you
right?
go. That's better. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course I saw that movie. They shoot horses, don't they? There
You
was
never,
that,
come
and
on. You must
I don't
have, I mean, horse racing is one thing, but the Hampton Classic horse show
know. Right.
is a
It, it,
whole
wa-
other thing, right? I
it,
mean,
it
I'm
was
sure
another.
you've been to
Yes,
horse races, but this
I
is
I have. This is this
yes,
is this is a very
this is
different
a whole
thing.
different, the jumping scene is a whole different bag.
Yeah, it really is. And Esperanza, I really was going to, you know, we once actually performed a song together, you and I, when we did the episode on the Larry Rivers sculpture Legs, and you and I sang the
Oh, that's
ZZ Top
right.
song Legs. I was
Yes.
actually thinking of breaking into the Tori Amos song Horses, but
Well, you're on your own because I don't really know the lyrics to that.
I'm going to spare our audience. We'll save that for an Instagram post. But anyway, um, Esperanza, I guess we should really start with the history of the Hampton Classic, with just the one backdrop that 2025 is actually the 50th anniversary
It's
of the
amazing.
Hampton Classic,
Yeah.
which is makes this episode sort of timely.
Yes.
And obviously, and we'll get into this as we go along, it certainly isn't the Hampton Classic of days gone by. It's
Mm.
sort of paralleled, the growth of this community, the infusion of money into this community.
And
Uh,
international quality of the community, I think.
that's
Yes.
correct. It
Mm.
touches on very, very true. It touches on all of those elements, but Esperanza, when it was really first organized, which was the early 1900s, I guess, before they actually termed it the Hampton Classic, it
Right.
was
It's sort of the origins of a horse show out here.
exactly this, whatever, the Southampton Horse Show, but it was organized actually in the early 1900s. That's when it started on, as described here. And this is really, I mean, a lot of this right from the Hampton Classic website, which has an extensive history on it. Um, on the sprawling open fields overlooking Lake Agawam, a very different looking Lake Agawam, I'm sure, at the time in the early
Probably
1900s.
potable, swimmable, unlike
One,
today.
1,000%, I have to believe that's true. And over the roaring 20s and what have you, this horse show flourished. And the article goes on to describe how a group of enthusiasts formed what was then, I guess, called the Southampton Riding and Hunt Club in 1922. Club began to be constructed 20 acres of the land on the outskirts of town. And when it opened in 28, this was a showpiece, as described here, for the entire eastern seaboard. You know, patronized, I mean, here's a word, Esperanza, patronized by wealthy equestrians
Well,
or
how could it
equestrian.
be any other way, right?
Thank
I
you
mean,
very much.
honestly,
Do we really need,
that's a
the,
redundant sort of
do we really,
description.
yeah, do we really need the embellishment of wealthy in front of equestrians?
Yes. Well,
Because,
the word equestrian, yeah, connotes wealth.
yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, I would, I would think so, Anyway, the horse show went through the Depression, the outbreak of World War II. The club founder passed away, and this club ultimately disbanded, sold off. But now the show was revived in 1952. So, again, we're not yet at the Hampton Classic, but it was revived in 52 and went on for the next 6 or 7 years through 58. But apparently, at this point, Esperanza, as described here, the glamour and the enthusiasm that distinguished these events pre war was sort of absent. Then, in 1959, and boy, this is going to bring a lot of themes together here, a Mrs. Morris Scott Wadley. I'll leave that name out there with a pause, okay? Mrs. Morris Scott Wadley helped to reorganize the show as a fundraiser for the Parrish Museum, which led to the formal incorporation of the Southampton Horse Show. So, Esperanza, apparently this show was then moved a little bit north to the Stanley Howard Estate in North Sea. We're in the 50s now, late 50s. And the horse show ball. Wow, that's a tongue twister. Oh, horse show ball were major social events of the summer.
Yeah, and just a quick aside or insertion here. The Stanley Howard Estate in North Sea, we've talked about the Psalm Estate with the Port of Missing Men, and this is in the same area. Conscience Point, also, Towed Point, all of that. It's in that
Right.
area of North Sea, Southampton. So just to geographically place this, and Mr. Howard was a big conservationist, and this land became preserved land upon his death. So then there's more to that, but just an interesting, to think of it as being much more removed even from the village life, sort of in East Hampton terminology, the upstreet
Right.
life, and really moved to an estate area, which was more like probably like a parkland in a way. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up also because it's interesting, Esperanza, how North Sea Tout Point has gotten a lot of play on our Hamptons podcast. People
Yeah.
tend to
Yeah.
think
It's
of,
true.
right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, people tend to think of Southampton really as Lake Agawam,
The village,
the
the village,
village
the
and
village. Yeah.
whatnot. But I mean, North Sea,
Yeah. It's a world unto
how,
itself, North
I
Sea.
mean, I'm telling you, and it's really, I'm glad, I'm glad in the body of work that is our Hampton podcast has really focused on North Sea a lot. And I mean, this one is actually going there, and I'm going to go on record as saying I would almost think our audience will be quite surprised to hear how a big part of the Hampton Classic horse show history was in North Sea.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah. I
which is
agree. I
you know,
agree. Yeah.
which is terrific. Now again, we're starting to get more closer into present day. For several years, the show was dormant. It seemed like the tradition has ended. But in the late 60s, so we're still not yet at the quote Hampton Classic, but horses and riding were in the area were again rising in popularity. And yes, I suppose that there's always been a horse riding presence out on Eastern Long Island. We
Well,
have,
I mean, come on. After all, we have like the original ranch in
right,
Montauk.
exactly.
There's
That's
always
right.
been, I mean, I think, there were probably, in a sense, cowboys out here without us
Yes,
even really having that distinction as it seems from, stories out west, the westerns.
Exactly right, and that's really true. So there's always been, that kind of presence, and that's a great point Esperanza made because Montauk in that era was the wild, wild east. So there's
Yes,
not much
exactly.
question about that. But again, in the '60s, started to come back, and then, and here's a familiar name we're going to bring up, Esperanza, Mrs. Got to tell you, this whole thing with, you know,
Women not having their own names.
yeah,
Oh,
I'm
it
like,
drives me crazy. I
it's
know. It was
really
such
like
a thing. And
it
it's
was
gone
really,
now, thankfully.
yeah, it was really, and not even like, not even, we don't even know Mrs. Schwenk's first name. She's Mrs. Edwin, I
Yeah,
mean,
you'd
like, but
have to do
anyway,
some research. Yeah.
yeah, but
Hmm.
anyway, we won't,
We didn't get that far.
we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but Mrs. Edwin M. Schwenk, and again, Schwenk, very well known name on the East End, managed to revive the show in '71. And for several years, so '71, we're really getting closer now, Esperanza. It was held at the Topping Riding Club in Sagaponack, fundraiser for the Hampton Day School. And as this article goes on to say, the modern day Hampton Classic was about to have its genesis. Wow. That was a reflective pause right there. I just started to.
It's the beginning. It's
And
really
it
like the
really,
true
I'm
beginning. Yeah.
just because it's really again, I'm, and our audience is going to see this as we go along. It really is just going to parallel so many elements and themes of our Hamptons podcast about the dramatic changes in Eastern Long Island. But we'll get there
Well, yeah, I
organically.
think, and you make this point, and I think people will see that clearly. And we've talked about this, it's like that we call it the sweet spot of, when things really started to change.
Yes,
This is it, the
this
1970s. I mean, it had already sort of, there were rumblings and things, the 20s, but all those interruptions, as
right,
reflected even with this horse show,
right,
World War I, World War II,
right.
even you could say Spanish, flu in the early
Depression,
1900s, the
right? Yeah,
Depression,
exactly. Yeah,
all these things that have interrupted the development of this area in some way or another. And then you've got the 1970s, pretty
right.
much like progress from there on.
I would say I would agree with you. I
And
mean that.
progress, I say that with a very sort of
Yeah, but that's got multiple meanings here.
cautiously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, I do think that's true. I mean, it was really, the 1970s was really when there were a lot of turning points, but for sure. But
Yes, including my arrival.
exactly. Wow. That's, wow.
It was all downhill from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Esperanza Leon, you know,
Blame me.
bringing up the age card here. Trust me, I've known Esperanza for a long time. She hasn't changed a bit. She looks exactly the same. I mean, I mean, she
No, and
hasn't
I don't
changed
mean
a bit.
my arrival in this world. I mean
I,
my arrival to East Hampton.
we
Well,
got the
both.
drift. We got your drift, but I mean, it was a sidebar of wanted to letting you know that I've known you a while. You haven't changed much. So anyway, in a good way, of course. So the early years, exhibitors at the horse show, as with most of these shows throughout the country, and again, we touched on this, tended to be made up of wealthy members of high society. Again, I mean, having a horse participating in a thing like that isn't exactly like, bringing a frisbee to a park or a basketball to a hoop. I mean, this is,
Yeah, and not to
you know,
detract the seriousness of like the competitions
correct.
necessarily, but it was more of and continues to be quite a bit of a social scene as opposed
Absolutely.
to, having that much focus on the horse jumping.
1,000% correct. And that's another Esperanza Leon segue because in 1976, so this is really 1 year into what we sort of now know as the Hampton Classic. It was suggested by Marie Christophe Demenil that the horse show be expanded, and this is really the turning point, a big turning point, from a local show to a 5 day, in quotation marks, A-rated event that would include show jumping and attract the top riders and horses in the country. And it was here, Esperanza, to a place we love and have spoken about in our Hamptons podcast previously. They actually moved this for a while in '76 east to East Hampton. and the spacious Dune Alpin Farm.
Right, right. Yeah, which is then I think I've mentioned to you, Irwin, that's when I went. I mean, I remember it being there.
Right. Okay. And again, we have had episodes on Dune Alpin. This was the old Katz Dairy Farm back in the day, Abe
Mm-hmm.
Katz.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, we did a podcast about the real estate, changing real estate market here. Tina Fredericks and partners actually developed Dune Alpin Farm into really the first cooperative development on the East End. So, I mean, Dune Alpin Farm has had a variety of really a rich history when you think about it. I mean, from an actual farm to development, but this was sort of the middle ground when it was actually used for a horse show. And, I mean, the whole shebang, Esperanza. Tents were erected, show rings, grandstands, everything.
Yeah, and
And
my recollection, just to place it geographically, is that it was, and I'm assuming the Dune Alpin Farm extended to, along Buckskill Road, Cove
right,
Hall, all of that, right?
definitely.
To what is Green Hollow Road, and that
Correct.
is where I recall and it's
Okay.
still, that field is there still to this
Well,
day, but then subdivided all along the perimeter. So that's where I remember it being, not where you will see horses nowadays still grazing by
right,
the silos and what are now the townhouses or the homes that are all along that beautiful
right.
development. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point to bring out. Yeah, I mean, this was obviously there was a lot of land there. I mean, this was a large working farm, in the early 20th century. So definitely, but it was interesting, and how this event, and it's funny, the article Esperanza describes it, how another tradition has begun, that of violent meteorological events upon the show. Now, again, you know, on Eastern Long Island, I know late August, those weeks leading up to Labor Day are probably the busiest time of the year on the East End. It's also definitely some volatile weather
Yeah,
that time of year.
unpredictable. Yep.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
I can tell you I have experienced
right.
that with the horse show and specifically. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I, been hurricanes during this show, and we're going to touch on that as we go
Yeah, it's
along. I mean, just
hurricane season. I mean,
it's
I've
hard.
often wondered, is this an ideal time to have this event every year?
Right.
Just
I wonder that, and also like when I see people, oh, I'm coming to like I'm gonna, people short-term renters, oh, I'm gonna come the week before Labor Day. I say the days are shorter. It's
it's cooler,
it's
or it can be
cooler.
really hot.
The weather, yeah, the weather is sort of ominous. I mean, really, it's not the heart of. But anyway, that's another conversation. So.
Don't
So that
come. That's what you're saying. Don't come.
well, we're coming June. To me, that's like the
No, I
really
mean, don't come at all.
right, right, right. Well, yeah, build it, they shall come. Right, yeah. Close the Shinnecock Canal. But in '77, again, pushing it along, the Hampton Classic formally incorporated the Southampton Horse Show, run as a benefit for Southampton Hospital. And here's where we're starting to get the influx of dollars. A Grand Prix with a $10,000 purse was offered. This wasn't going on in the early 20th century, Esperanza,
I
when they
can't
were on Lake
imagine. No,
Agawam.
no, yeah.
Okay. And, again, we're going to get here, but this thing has grown to massive scales in terms of events and everything else. We're going to get
Yeah,
there.
it's one of the largest,
That's
according
right.
to this information that we have, one of the largest hunter jumper shows in the United States of
That's right.
America.
Crazy, crazy.
Yeah.
Now, here we go. 81, the Federation. I should have you
Would
say
you, yeah,
this.
would you like me to say this?
Well, yeah, Esperanza, please.
The FEI, the Fédération Équestre Internationale,
Oh,
the
that's
International Equestrian Federation.
got that was poetry that was just said right there, ladies and
Well,
gentlemen. That
yeah,
was not
no,
just that. It
please,
was really
any native French speakers, please cover your
very true.
ears.
Very true. But that's That's what that organization designated. This is the first of a select number of qualifying events for the following year's World Cup. So I mean, this
Yeah,
Hampton
it's gained importance in the means of the athleticism of the
that's right,
sport, right?
and
I mean, it's
and
as a sport. Yeah.
and like a snowball too. Like it's just, and we're going to see this pattern go. Remember, we're only like whatever 6, 7 years into the official Hampton Classic now, but you see the progression. So in '82 was another big year. The show was moved to its present location where it still remains, which is the 65-acre Hampton Classic Showgrounds on Snake Hollow Road in Bridgehampton. If we want to orient our audience, it's sort of, can I say, behind Martyrs, behind the Bridgehampton Common,
It's
off
exactly
toward.
there. Yes. Yeah. I
Okay,
mean, that's parkland, either owned by Southampton Town,
right,
or the county. I'm not sure, but anyway,
right.
I think it's the town. Yeah.
So that was in '82, and again, same year, tents were raised. More disastrous weather, a tornado ripped through, destroying the tents with only a week left before the show. The crews had to work overtime to put it all together, and they did. But again, yet another time of severe weather really impacting this show. Now we go along, we continue. '84, a day was added to the schedule. They were now '84. This is 9 years into what we now know as the Hampton Classic. It was 7 days of competition.
Hmm.
And on the Grand Prix day of that year, Olympic show jumping riders of the U.S. equestrian team, just returning from a gold medal victory, the LA Olympics, were honored in a special ceremony. So, again, this, I guess, Esperanza, this is illustrating the sheer magnitude of this event.
Right. Yeah.
You
The
know,
significance of it. Yeah.
I mean, we had the gold medal winning Olympic show jumpers being honored here.
Hmm.
Continuing on, '85.
More bad
More
weather.
bad. How about this? The year of the mud. Is
The
that in the
year of the
Chinese
mud.
New Year
Well,
calendar? Or,
yeah, it's
that
either
they have
dust or mud in there, I have to say.
the year of the mud. One day before the show was to start, a torrential rainstorm all over the showgrounds as exhibitors were arriving. They were mired in this area. The parking fields had to be closed. The
Yeah, I
showgrounds,
mean, you have to think these are 18 wheelers, 18-wheel trucks coming in with animals and people, and all these trailers are
right?
getting stuck in this
Yeah,
disastrous
and,
post-storm. Yeah.
and they're describing this. The rains were so severe that literally rivers and lakes were all over the ground. But somehow, some way, it dried out in time for Grand Prix Sunday, and the sun shone on a record crowd of onlookers. Now we move it to '86. Opening day would take place on a Sunday and would span 2 weekends. And in '87, I didn't even know this part at all. The Grand Prix was televised on ESPN. Esperanza. This is a long way from Lake Agawam.
Yeah. Well,
I,
when they didn't even have television. Yeah.
is that right? That's also
It'd be
that's also.
interesting to see the newspaper articles from back that far, but this is definitely on another level. Absolutely.
I'm completely in '88. Again, this is really interesting the way they put this together and the way we're sort of trying to present it to our audience. In '88, the show was chosen as the final selection trial for the Olympic Games. So the magnitude of what's going on here is just, it's really something.
And interestingly, that year was, I guess, the one time where they moved the show's dates from the end of August and over Labor Day to the end of July, because they needed to enforce a quarantine for the team horses that were going to be going to
Right,
Seoul for the Olympic Games. Yeah.
right. And
So
moving
that's
this along,
interesting. The one time they pushed the date
yeah,
out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so and again, just to continue, and
More bad weather.
more bad weather.
Between,
Hurricane Bob.
as we full disclaimer, right? Like we know nothing really about horse
Right,
jumping,
right,
nor names in horse jumping, but there are
right,
many prize winners, and who, there are people out there who I'm sure will know of these names, such as Michael Matz and his
right,
wife Dee Dee Alexander, and others who are mentioned throughout here, who won large prizes right into 2001 with a $150,000 Prudential Financial Grand Prix
I'm so glad you said
prize.
that because that's exactly where I was starting to lead into with all of this. This prize money again. In 2000, just before the 2001 Esperanza brought up, a Margie Goldstein Engel of Wellington, Florida, victorious in the $150,000 Crown Royale Grand Prix presented by David Yerman just before she boarded a plane for Sydney, where she would represent our country in the Olympics. There was a Seniors Day in 2000. 2001, Engel rode to her second victory in the $150,000 Prudential Classic. Won it again in 2002.
Yeah, I was there. These were the years where I had my gallery, and
Right,
I knew the directors at the time, Tony Hitchcock and his wife Jean Lindgren, lovely, lovely people. And they enticed me to, this is a big part of this horse show, as we've said already, it's a social scene.
right,
It's not just about the horses. And mind you, we've been emphasizing how this is it's a wealthy sort of group of people who gather for these kinds of events and who participate. But the fact is that the Hampton Classic is a very democratic show.
right.
And I don't know what it is costing now. I haven't looked, and I haven't been in a few years, um, but you could go in, and you pay by the carload.
Yeah.
So, and it's
Sort of
not a
like a
lot of
drive-in
money.
movie,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. And so it's a lot of fun. You don't have to, be under the big VIP tent, which
Right.
is, as nice as that is,
That's
it's actually a very accessible
like
event.
egalitarian event in a sense. I mean,
Yes.
it's
And
really
what I was going to say though is that I was part of, they have like a one area set aside for what became increasingly, and especially after Tony and Jean left, became increasingly sort of high end or kind of luxury boutique kind of stalls
right.
that were set up under tents in one area. Um, but I remember very well, as they mention here, the Fiesta Day that was a
Right.
way that I think was something conceived by Tony and Jean to honor and salute the Latin American
Wow.
participants, who, the fact is, horse industry in general is very much about a Latin American component. There are not only the jumpers and
Right.
the participants in the competitions, but behind the scenes, boy, all those people working so hard to get these shows off the ground and maintain the horses and so forth. Guess where they're
That
from?
that's great. That's great that you brought that out, and I didn't realize that. And it's really a wonderful point, and especially wonderful that uh, Tony and Jean recognized them and
Yeah,
acknowledged
recognize
them,
them,
and
and also
you know,
because it was a way of sharing that with a local population, an increasingly larger demographic of Latin
right.
American Spanish speaking people that had progressively been arriving into the area.
That's that's a terrific point to bring across, and again, going to start to wrap this up and really wind it into the present day. 2005, as Esperanza was mentioning. they were, at that point they were retiring from the Hampton Classic, Tony and Jean. Although it's funny, they to me, like I still identify so well with Tony and Jean being, to
I
me, they were the
know.
brand of the
They
Hampton Classic.
were,
You
exactly.
know,
It's really,
um,
yeah.
I, I'm almost shocked to read that they've been out of it for 20 years because their names are
I'm
still
shocked to think that
right,
because, as I said, for those 3 or 4 years, I participated in that
right.
event, which left me wiped out. Those horse people, they're hardy because you're inhaling a lot of dust,
I
and
could
and
imagine.
then with the
Yeah,
bad weather that would come, oh my gosh,
always.
it was rough. But
Yeah,
I really kind of, after Tony and Jean left, I think one more year, and it just didn't, it for me, it didn't have the same
right.
flavor.
Interesting. Interesting. So there was a new executive director that took over the following year. And again, the trajectory, 2007, again, week-long rains. The Hampton Classic invested $250,000 to renovate and upgrade the so stabling areas, tried to improve the drainage. Um, again,
It's
just
an amazing thing, Irwin, and the new director, Shanette Bart Cohen, has obviously stewarded this show very well. But it's really like a little city that pops up
yeah,
for a week, for
it
7 to 10 days. I mean, obviously longer than that, but for a
right.
1 week event.
It really is. And again, and the trajectory that Esperanza brings out. I mean, 2009, there was a $250,000 FTI Grand Prix and FEI World Cup event. You know, just thematically, it just really mirrors
Yeah,
what's the entire East
parallels.
End.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Complete parallel. I mean,
Mm.
2011 delayed 3 days due to Hurricane Irene. I mean, just unbelievable. The weather continuing to wreak havoc. But again, 2012, there was another $250,000 top honor, Kent Farrington. 2013, Longines became a major partner. And it says here, the way they put this, their support enhanced the classic in several ways, including instituting the Longines Riders Challenge that awarded $30,000 to the rider accumulating the most points in the open jumper division. So you could see where this is going. 2014, we had an Olympic veteran to claim the $250,000 Hampton Classic Grand Prix presented by Land Rover. The sponsorship going on here now, the players, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember in my time it was, I think, Yerman.
Right.
So it was never not, it was never low. And
No, 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 no. I mean, no
you weren't
question
having
about
Walmart
Walmart. Right. 2018, it was the $300,000 Hampton Classic Grand Prix presented by Douglas Elliman. And you could see these companies, Douglas Elliman, David Yurman, whoever, they wanted to associate their brand with the Hampton
Absolutely.
Classic brand.
Yes,
And I think
yes.
that's a point that really we need to emphasize here because, again, this is a long way from Dune Alpin. This is a long way from Lake Agawam at
Right.
this
And
point.
it is, it was, remember, this was established to raise money as a Hampton Classic horse
That's
show,
right.
to raise money for the Southampton Hospital. And so,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, all of these sponsors contribute to the success of that event as a fundraiser for the hospital.
That's exactly right. Because again, it's a great point to bring out because the origins were very altruistic and charitable in nature. That was what this was all about.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's really as good a time as any to start wrapping this up. I mean, again, the trajectory does continue in terms of prize money, in terms of awards, in terms of prestige.
In terms of
Tesperanza's
interruptions, because then, of course, we did have the 2020 edition, what would have been the 45th year of the
right.
Hampton Classic, was not held because of the
Right.
COVID pandemic.
That's correct.
So, again, it's like, as we always say, history repeating itself, or history being circular. It happens. Yes.
Oh,
Keeps
I forgot
happening.
about that. I forgot about that history being circular. I'm so glad you said that. We love that. We love that. We love that, Esperanza. trademarked line, but history is circular, and it really is. It's a great point to bring up because if it's not a weather event that cancels it, it's a worldwide pandemic. I mean, it was, this is,
Well,
in a sense,
amazingly, the weather events seem to never have canceled it completely,
right,
which is
right.
such a
But it's,
testament. But
it, it,
yeah.
it really is. But I mean, and again, if you bring it to present day, I mean, this is even a few years ago. There was a $400,000 Longines Hampton Classic Grand Prix. I mean, yeah, the dollars have increased, the prize money increased, and everything. But I think we could almost, I suppose, I think we could almost end on this to really bring it into present day. How the Hampton, this is right off the Hampton Classic website, and it's really as good a place as any to say the Hampton Classic Horse Show is always a grand way to end the summer. Held in high regard by the horse community, famous for its Hampton celebrity sightings, and second to none in high-end shopping boutiques.
Hmm.
Definitely not the original mission, I might add.
Well, yeah, I have a little comment if you can
Yeah,
squeeze it
I'm going
in.
to wait up. I was feeding you this line for that comment. I know. We predict
You
each
know
other
where I'm
here.
going. Yeah.
I know where you're gonna. I know where you're gonna go. But I like the way they close by saying it earns its nickname again. Now this is. Let me frame this. We're a long way from Lake Agawam here. It earns its nickname. Like the pause. The classic.
The classic. Yeah. I mean, yes, it is. It does. But the fact is, to me, it's the classic because I remember it always being this very, you'd have the kids' day, you'd have the petting zoo. There was, it
Right.
was like a fun thing to do, even if it were just for one day to
Right.
go with the family, fill up the car with family and
Right.
friends, go for a day, people watch a little. Um, I have to say, and this is not a judgment. I think it's a lovely event still, but it kind of lost its interest to me because I'm not really interested in celebrity sightseeing.
Right. 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 But
You
it's like,
know,
yeah,
it's really,
it's
to me, it was more about a community event,
yeah.
and
But
it's definitely uh, much, much more than that.
it does. I understand your point completely, and it's this is not news to any of our Hamptons podcast audience. I mean, the way we. I think our audience knows the way we feel about this place. But I am heartened in a way, Esperanza, that you still preface it by saying, sort of the semblance, some of the bones, the feel good parts of the event uh, are still there for you and for the
I
community.
hope, yeah, I hope I'll have to get over there for the 50th edition, and I'll let you know.
I'll meet you there.
Okay.
Esperanza, as
Thanks,
always, a
Irwin.
pleasure. Thanks
Really
so
fun.
much. That was fun. Bye bye. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.